All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Shanika Peck. I'm an education specialist over at Foundations. Welcome to Helen Oakes Literacy Institute. Today we have a few exciting guests from the School District of Philadelphia, and we'll be getting started very shortly. But before we do, I would love to go over a few housekeeping items. And so I want to let everyone know that we have, of course, this webinar will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel. Let me get this up for you. All right, Hillary, can you move over to the next slide so that we can see our housekeeping items? Oh, there it is. All right. So, of course, like I mentioned before, our webinar will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel. We highly encourage everyone to collaborate and share their responses in the chat box. If you have any questions during the webinar, please place them there. We will answer all questions during our Q&A session or portion of the webinar. All resources will be shared with you in a follow-up email. At the end of our session today, we have a form that we will share so that you can receive your Act 48 credits. We also have a special drawing at the end of the webinar. So those of you who can sit tight with us and of course interact throughout all of our sessions, we will have a special drawing at the very end. You will be entered in a chance to win a special package prize, including a book from a local author. And of course, we have our certificates that will be mailed within a week. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our CEO, Rhonda Lauer. She's the CEO and president of Foundations, Inc. She herself is a Philadelphian native, right? So she has done a couple of roles, right? So she's been a teacher, associate superintendent in Philadelphia School District, even serving superintendent in Delaware County. She's on multiple boards, including Urban Affairs Coalition and Say Yes to Education. She holds degrees from Temple University and certifications from University of Pennsylvania. Rhonda believes in the potential of every child and educator and emphasizes strong leadership. She's a devoted mother, grandmother, and she's known for her passion of the arts and her unmatched mac and cheese recipe. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Rhonda.
Thank you, Shanika. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. This is our annual Helen Oakes Literacy Institute. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking to you about the wonderful woman for whom this is named. Helen was a Board of Education member when I was a school principal in Philadelphia back in the 1980s. And she was incredible. She was the kind of board member who went out to schools. And when she went out, she didn't just do a walkthrough. She actually went into classrooms and stayed and listened. She listened to teachers, she listened to parents, she talked to kids, and she was there to support. She was there to help and to help find solutions to the many issues that we faced then. And sadly to say, there are many of those issues we still face today. Helen passed away in May of 2019, and her sons, we were able to get together and say, what would she love? And I have to say, I have to thank Dennis and Deborah. Dennis is Helen's son, and Deborah his wife, and Jeffrey, Helen's other son, and his wife Nicole, and the rest of the Helen Oakes family for agreeing to sponsor this Institute for Teachers in Philadelphia. Helen was completely devoted to teachers in Philadelphia. And I have to tell you, we did some things that were so much fun. I really feel like we should continue to do some of those things. I used to go with Helen to teachers' homes, and she sort of had these little groups of teachers that met all over the city. And we would go and sit and, have a few snacks and talk about issues. What can we do about kids who aren't reading at grade level? And we would have these wonderful, wonderful conversations and discussions. And it was like this peer-to-peer networking that was happening all over the city. It was a great adventure going with Helen. Helen also was a journalist, an amazing journalist. She published herself, by the way, the Helen Oakes newsletter. And that newsletter would come out every single month. And it would go to all of the teachers in Philadelphia and to all of the schools. It was useful. It was the kind of newsletter that you could take and you could learn something from it. And the next day, you could actually implement it in your classrooms. And for my colleagues on this call, at the meeting who are teachers, that is something that we don't always get from a professional development or learning session. So I just wanted, I know that you'll read about Helen, but I have to tell you that she was not only a great professional, she was a great person. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Dr. Nyshawana Francis-Thompson, who is very affectionately known across the district as Dr. Nye, is the Chief of Curriculum and Instruction in the School District of Philadelphia. Now, I know most of you know Dr. Nye because Dr. Nye embodies so many of the qualities that Helen Oakes would say, yeah, she gets out there, because Dr. Nye gets out to the schools. She's out in the schools, and so many of you may already know her. She's an accomplished educational leader. She is an extraordinary public speaker. Her expertise expands evidence-based reading, curriculum design, special education, and culturally responsive instruction. Dr. Nye's journey includes roles as an emotional support teacher, a special ed director, and various leadership positions in the School District of Philadelphia. She is also an adjunct professor at St. Joseph's University. She has received numerous awards, but at the end of the day, most importantly, she is a wonderful friend to me and my family. So without further ado, it's all yours, Nye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for that warm welcome and introduction. I am so excited to be with some of my favorite people on this Saturday morning. So I want to start off by saying good morning, Philadelphia educators. I am, again, ever so grateful to be with you all on a Saturday morning, doing what I love to do the most, and that is teaching. Again, my name is Dr. Nyshawana Francis-Thompson, and I go by Dr. Nye. I'm currently your Chief of Curriculum and Instruction in the School District of Philadelphia. I have spent the last 17 years of my career in the School District of Philadelphia teaching, researching, leading, loving, and advocating for culturally responsive, evidence-based reading instruction for all children. As Rhonda shared, I started my journey as a special education teacher in the School District of Philadelphia, working with many of you on this meeting that I'm seeing all the names pop up across the screen. And I spent time really examining how reading was being taught to all children, and then also spending time unlocking reading for so many children across this school district. And I started again within the special education realm, but I also ventured outside of that realm as an MTSS champion in the school district, where I began to advocate and look at how do we support students prior to them being identified or needing to be identified as having a disability and requiring specially designed instruction. I am also a mother of an 8-year-old striving reader who also experienced pandemic learning. So while I know many teachers may say, Dr. Nye, what do you know about teaching post-pandemic or during a pandemic? And I'm here to tell you my entire teaching career was involving teaching through traumatic situations as an emotional support teacher, but also sitting side by side with my daughter as I led in the school district of Philadelphia, and I watched reading instruction for my own child in my home. So this is an area that I am very passionate about, not just for my own child, but for all the children across the city of Philadelphia. So today I'm here to talk with you about unlocking the truth and the joy in reading for our children here in Philadelphia. My hope is that you leave here today better than you came. And I am talking to the teacher who is 2 months into her career, and you may be considering, why am I here and why did I make this decision? I want to say to you, just hold on. Stick with it. Our children need you. I'm talking about the teacher that has committed decades to teaching children in Philadelphia how to read. And you may be on your last years of teaching, and I want to thank you for your dedication and commitment to serving the children of Philadelphia. We need you too. We need you to pour into the next generation of teachers and pass that torch as you begin to take your next journey. I am also talking to those teachers that still have that joy and passion in your heart, and you bring it into your classroom on a day-to-day basis, in spite of all of the circumstances that may exist within the community outside of the school and the community within the school. I want to say to you that I see you, I hear you, and I want to continue to emphasize that we need you. Next slide. So one of the things as a teacher, go back. One of the things as a teacher, I love to bring music in the classroom. It brings me so much joy. Even as a professor right now, all of my students know I always have a theme song. Even my team in central office, there's always theme music associated to what I do. And music just brings a level of joy to me, and everyone that knows me knows that I love music. So I'm going to start off by sharing one of my favorite songs, and it's Something Inside So Strong. And we actually decided to use this song in one of our curriculum units because we wanted to make sure that we were also, while we were exposing our students to books with hard history, we also wanted them to experience some joy as they learned that hard history. So this was one of the songs that we included in one of our curriculum units, but it's one of my favorite songs. So I'm going to play a little bit of it so you can hear it and be as motivated and inspired as I am about this song. Press play.
Yeah.
The further you take my rights away, the faster I will run. You can't deny me, you can't decide to turn your face away. Something inside so strong, I know that I can make it, though you're doing me wrong, so wrong.
They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, a warrior, more than a survivor. You can thrive, transformed by adversity. You face every challenge thrown your way, stand strong, you can overcome. They try to beat us down, but we rise above the struggle. Never giving up under pressure, we don't struggle. Instead, we discover gold inside as we realize no matter what, you'll never dull our shine.
Deny my place inside this wonder world. It will shine so brightly in what blind to. Something inside so strong. Know that though you're doing me wrong, you got never cry. No, no. Something inside so strong. There's something inside me. Inside so
You can stop it here. Next slide. So in this presentation, or teaching as I like to call it, we're going to talk about a lot of truths. And I want to share this quote from Malcolm X, and he says that untruths have to be untold. We have to be untaught before we can be taught. And once untaught, we ourselves can unteach others. And as I think about this topic that we're talking about here today, there are a lot of untruths that we've all been told. I'm going to share two of my own, but as I'm sharing two, I want you to drop some untruths that you may have been told as it relates to the learning of reading for our children here in the city of Philadelphia. I'll start off by saying we were told that learning to read is a natural process. And we know that that is an untruth. Learning to read is a very complex human process that requires very explicit instruction in order for our young people to be taught to read. We were told that the science of reading aligned practices emphasizes phonics only, and we know that to be an untruth. So I'm going to give you some space and time to just drop some untruths that you have been told in the chat in regards to our children in the city of Philadelphia learning to read. Memorization is everything. Sight words are everything. Another untruth. Cueing system, look right, sound right. Scripted curriculums will allow for progress. Kids don't want to learn to read, or kids don't want to learn to read, or they will never read. Sight words should be practiced. You don't decode when you read to them. Sight words equals reading. Guided reading is the only way to teach reading. Look at the pictures. Oh, look at the pictures. Small group instruction is a must. Reading levels must match for ability to write. So some of these untruths, again, as Brother Malcolm X shared, is that we have to make sure that the untruths have been untold and the unteaching has been untaught before we can, again, teach ourselves and teach others. And I want to start off by saying this is not a teaching or a speech about creating villains. This is more about exposing these untruths so that we can truly get to educating ourselves and educating the young people of the city of Philadelphia. I want us to all be mindful of not creating the narrative in public education of being the victim and the villain at the same time, as one of my favorite singers, Beyonce, would say. Educators and education has been the backbone of this country. We know that each of us are powerful drivers of life outcomes for people, and that's a heavy, heavy weight to carry. And I know you may be thinking, wow, so much placed on the shoulders of educators. But I'm here to tell you today that it was a teacher It was a teacher that stepped into the classroom and saw the potential in the children when no one else saw the potential in the children, and every day showed up passionately, teaching and reading and learning and planning and collaborating with families and working within the community to really bring high quality instructional experiences to their students. And that is something that is oftentimes underrated or understood in public education about the work that educators have to do day in and day out. We're not just in the rooms teaching. There's so much more that teachers are doing in our classrooms, and it's a story that we must all tell. Next slide. So one of my favorite writers, girlfriend, good sister, Dr. Bettina Love, she writes, for schools to be well, educators must be well. And I know, it's November. And I know that many of you may be tired of hearing about self-care, but this must be a top priority because we are in a human service field. And I'm going to get to reading, and I want you to know there's a reason behind the way I'm flowing with my teaching here this morning. But there's a reason why I'm starting with us first. As human service, people that work in a human service field, we often put ourselves last. And I'm here to tell you today that this behavior can have dire consequences on your well-being. I'm going to share a personal story because I truly believe that our experiences are meant to be shared to help someone else on their journey. Post-pandemic, I was experiencing significant medical issues, and I had a significant medical scare that could have almost cost me my life. And I remember thinking to myself, how did I get here and what happened? So first, I want to talk about something that we all have in us, and that's why we are in public education. And it's that concept of passion. As educators, we have so much passion in our hearts, and we fight tirelessly for the young people in this city. And oftentimes I tell people, I don't see barriers, I only see opportunities. And even during a pandemic, while it was something that none of us had ever experienced, each of us faced the days as if we knew what we were doing because we were committed to the children that were on the other side of the screens that we were servicing. And there were so many heroic things that happened across our city when I think about the pandemic. And one of the things, I read a shirt that someone had on the other day, and it said, educators are essential workers. So what I experienced post-pandemic was what I learned is called compassion fatigue. And it's a form of traumatic stress resulting from repeated exposure to traumatized individuals or adversive details or traumatic events while working in a helping or protecting profession. And while that was a very traumatic experience for me, it was something that I'd never faced before. I want to tell you that what I learned through the support of friends, therapy, and strength training, that you are responsible for you, and you can do hard things. All things begin and end with you. So when I say practice self-care like your life depends on it, I mean it because it does. Self-care can mean a wide range of things for every person. I'm going to share a few reminders just to give you this opportunity to think about yourself first, because it's a Saturday and you're still showing up to learn. You're still putting others first. But one of the things I want to remind you about is to schedule an appointment with your primary care physician. It is really important as educators that you know your numbers, you know what's going on with your bodies. We often take this for granted. The second thing I want to encourage you to do is utilize the employee assistance program. I promise you it works. I myself have had to utilize the employee assistance program. In the school district of Philadelphia, that program is called LIRA, and I'm not promoting any one program. However, there are tons of resources there for you. No one is going to take care of you better than you. So you have to remember, all things self-care begins and ends with you. The third thing I will say is set some healthy boundaries at work and at home. Your time is very precious. We are only here for a little while. Please set healthy boundaries. And then finally, I will say, get you a squad, a positive squad of educators or non-educators that can help you to keep things in perspective when sometimes you may veer off track. They can provide you with that emotional support that you may need. In all of my years in education, I have established some great relationships with many of you that are on this call. There was a teacher when I was experiencing difficulty that I was on the phone with who helped me through that very difficult moment that I was experiencing post-pandemic. Get you a squad. You need a community of support. You cannot do this work alone. We have to be there for each other through the good times and the tough times. And I promise you, I'm going to talk about reading. Just stick with me. We have to deal with ourselves first before we can get to anyone else. Next slide, please. So in my class that I teach at St. Joe's has really driven a lot of work that I began to do in the district with myself as well as with my students. And it's this concept of identity development. And I want to read this quote by Tricia Barvia. We teach who we are. This is what can make our practice so powerful, even transformative, but also potentially dangerous. I'll say that again. We teach who we are. This can make our practice so powerful, even transformative, but also potentially dangerous. Tricia talks about bringing all of our identities and our experiences that inform them into our teaching practices. And we have to interrogate the ways in which the experiences that we have shaped our practice, particularly around how we engage with students and our relationships with students and the ways we teach students. And unfortunately, there has been no universal focus on identity development in K-12 or higher education in general to support the facilitation of self-work that needs to be done. And again, I speak about this because I also teach about this, and it's a concept that I myself have begun to unpack things about my teaching journey or things about my personal identity and how those things have impacted the way I taught and showed up in the classroom. And in our curriculum, we've included a focus on identity development modeled after Dr. Gholdy Muhammad, who was one of the first people that I really heard talk about bringing identity development into the realm of curriculum. And she says identity is composed of notions of who we are, who others say we are, both positive and negative, and whom we desire to be. These three things are at play in our classrooms as we teach our children and as we teach our children to read. And I want you to reflect on that. There's this complex and dynamic dance among these three things towards identity development for both adults and children. And you may be asking, Dr. Nye, what does that have to do with teaching children to read? And this is where we have the science of reading, but there's this culturally responsive aspect that must be coupled with the science of reading because identity development is so critical to our children in Philadelphia. And this is precisely why the types of books that we read to our children matter. They are just as essential to the science of reading, which we will talk about shortly. I am an advocate for exposing children to books that not only have images and stories about them, but books that positively reflect the greatness of who they are. I remember the first book that I saw as a little girl with a Black girl on the cover. It was Amazing Grace, I believe, and it was the first time I had seen a Black girl on the cover of a book that looked like me. And she had goals and dreams of becoming, and I loved it. I am currently reading Jamil Hill, Uphill Memoir. I'm obsessed with memoirs lately. That means I must be planning to write a memoir very soon. But there's a chapter in the book where she talks about being overly exposed to books and media with characters that did not look like her. So she began to rewrite the stories with characters that looked like her, and she reimagined what Black life could be if there were books and media that she was being exposed to that represented who she was. She talked about how books gave her a way to see a life beyond what she had access to in her community, in her environment in Detroit. So I'm here to say what children read matters. Next slide. Another truth. One must tell the truth and kindness and love. That is the responsibility. How one receives it is not on you, but on them. Teachers, educators, Philadelphians, I know that you have some truths and you have some stories that you can share about your present, past, or current circumstances in public education. And I encourage you to write and speak your truth as well, so that you too may use your voice in service to our students. When I prepare speeches, I often hear the stories of people, families, and teachers and leaders that I interact with. And I think to myself, how can I speak to their hearts? I have never met Miss Helen Oakes personally. I have only had the opportunity to read about her. And the fact that I read about her after I wrote this speech, and there's so much in this speech about truth, it tells you the power of how when you're connected to people that it requires you or it draws out a truth within you. From what I learned about her, she's a truth teller. She did not hold back perspectives. She elevated the voices of educators, and she shared issues in public education in Philadelphia that many people did not want to hear. I also think about people like Dr. Constance Clayton, rest in peace. The first African-American, the first woman superintendent in the school district of Philadelphia. She was also a truth teller and a fierce advocate in public education here in Philadelphia. And I often think to myself, what did it take for these women to stand in their truth during some of the most challenging times? Facing the truth can be challenging for all of us. But I am reminded again that things may be hard, but we can do hard things. Next slide. Literacy in America. It defines class status. It is the driver in high-stake poverty and determines the quality of life for. And I left that blank intentionally because I want you to think about a young person that's sitting in your classroom or a young person that has sat in your classroom. Literacy in America has been deprived from people based on race and class. We have to face that fact that it was denied, and it continues to be denied to some children. There are also so many distractions around what is happening in our classroom and teaching our children to read, from a lack of evidence-based approaches to book bans. As educators, we have to silence the noise. We have to focus on our pedagogy and the students that are sitting in front of us. In the next section, I'm going to speak about the science behind reading and also share some implementation strategies for your pedagogy. Next slide. Why are there so many unspoken or unknown rules in reading? Why? Why do we have to decipher through research, through policy, through political wars around teaching children to read? Why? The truth is that we need to know about the science of reading it. And I know you may have seen these two images. Thumbs up if you've seen these images before. And I share a quick story about the image with the reading rope. So a couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Hollis Scarborough, who actually created that image. And she's a very passionate woman, another truth teller. And she shared a story about how she had to call up a company for misrepresenting her image. She was truly a joy to speak with and learn from. Again, a real truth teller and passionate about how we are teaching our children to read. And I'm so ever grateful that I had the opportunity to just sit and talk with her and to hear her voice and understand the why behind that image. This image reinforces that reading is complex, that there are these intertwined skills that must be explicitly taught in order for our students to become skilled readers. It emphasizes language comprehension and word recognition as both essential to brain-based reading. The other image is also another simple view of reading. It focuses on decoding and language comprehension as two things combined together to give us reading comprehension. And both of these models, the idea is that students will become skilled readers when provided explicit instruction in these two areas. And again, I would add, from a culturally responsive perspective, that skilled reading is also connected to the liberation of young people. Therefore, the goal of reading is beyond just being a skilled reader. It is truly about unlocking those life outcomes that I shared earlier for our young people in Philadelphia. You may be asking yourself, Dr. Nye, why do I need to know this? Well, you might win some, but you just lost one. That one student that you may have lost could be from the lack of understanding of how the science of reading works. It is really critical as educators that we understand the why behind our pedagogy. So when we're engaging with our students, we understand the moves that we need to make instructionally based on understanding the why behind our pedagogy. Yes, there are programs that may present themselves as being programs as related to the science of reading. Yes, there may be approaches that may say that they're aligned to the science of reading, but as educators of readers, we need to understand the why. So regardless of the resource that's in front of us, we understand the process of how the brain learns to read. Next slide. In Pennsylvania, recently, in Chapter 49, this is policy, where it lays out the responsibility of higher education institutions and schools to ensuring that teachers are developed in structured literacy. It's not something that we can write off. This is now a part of policy. So we have research, we have policy, we have theory, but I also want to talk about a few implications for practice focused on foundational skills, because two of my team members are going to follow up later with talking about the significance of vocabulary and morphology. And I want to give a shout out to Felicia and Amanda, who will follow up with this dynamic keynote. I know my team, and I know that they will do an awesome job during their presentations. But just to focus on pedagogy, program aside, resource aside, in order to get to structured literacy, we have to ensure that our instruction is direct, that we're clearly defining and teaching all the new skills to guide students through the application of what they're learning, as well as extending the practice. It must be systematic. Yes, there are programs that are specially designed and systematic, and they have phonics-based systematic instruction built into them. But instruction in structured literacy requires this instruction to be not only direct, systematic, but also explicit. And explicit instruction is step-by-step, and the actions of the teacher are clear, specific, direct, relatable, and oftentimes predictable. These are things that unlock the science of reading. It brings the science of reading into practice. Next slide. Students must practice and apply the skills that they've learned to a decodable text. I've been in classrooms where we see the phonics lesson, we see the phonemic awareness lesson, and then we go into a text that is not even relatable to the phonics or the phonemic awareness that they just learned. Decodable texts are what will help the student practice and apply the skills that they're learning in foundational skills. It's really critical that students are able to read these decodable texts and not just read them one time, repeated reading, as well as reading them with a partner. And this comes so naturally to me, again, because I spent so many years in the classroom observing and teaching students and identifying where those gaps were in reading instruction for them. So these are very powerful pedagogic practices to apply in your classroom. Next slide. And then finally, the teacher provides corrective feedback to the student. That corrective feedback has to be immediate. You identify where the student is making the error, you correct the error, have the student repeat the correction so that they can move on and start the task over. Teaching, providing that corrective feedback only strengthens the student's ability. And then finally, looking at your data and using your data to scaffold supports. It's not enough to just look at your assessments in aggregate. You have to dig deep into your assessments to really find the areas where students require additional supports and provide those supports to your students. So these are some focus around foundational skills that over the years in the School District of Philadelphia, we've been providing development to our teachers around this. And I wanted to continue to emphasize this in this keynote speech. And I want to close lastly with the next slide. I want to close with joy. Dr. Gholdy Muhammad talks about joy as the practice of loving self and humanity, caring for and helping humanity and earth, recognizing truth, beauty, aesthetics, art, wonder, and working together to solve the social problems of this world. There is joy in facing the truth, although it may be hard. There is joy in unlocking reading for children. There is joy in complex texts that we choose to expose our students to about themselves and others. There is joy in taking care of yourself so that you may continue to serve the children of this city well. I encourage you to be well and be bold about teaching our children to read in Philadelphia. And finally, again, I want to thank foundations. I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of the 5th annual Helen Oakes Institute. I hope again that the rest of your day is filled with new learnings that will translate into practice in your classrooms. Be well, peace, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nye. You really took us through a lot of great points that we can use for deep reflection. What we'll do now is we'll turn it over to our Q&A session. I would love to introduce our moderator, Nancy Scharf. Nancy Scharf is a literacy consultant to Philadelphia's Read by Fourth campaign, has a 2012 Master's of Special Education for High Incidence Disabilities from St. Joseph's University. This SJU program is the first in the state to achieve IDA accreditation and align with structured literacy. She is Wilson certified and has taught every grade K through 6. As literacy consultant working with Read by Fourth partners, Nancy developed the Parent Workshop on Early Reading Skills, as well as initiatives to strengthen teacher and leader knowledge in structured literacy. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Nancy.
Thank you, Shanika. And thank you to the Helen Oakes Literacy Institute for hosting this event and inviting all of us. And Dr. Nye, thank you so much for that keynote. It was powerful. You know, you said at the beginning, I hope you can leave better than you came. And I don't think there's any question that we are all leaving better than we came. You also talked about Helen Oakes speaking to and from her heart and to other people's hearts. And you, I know you know this, but you did the same for all of us. So I thank you. I thank you for that. And on behalf of all who are in attendance. And I think we have a lot of questions coming in. And let me start with the first one is, how are we moving professional development for teachers of grades above 3rd to address the gaps in phonics and foundational skills?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. A great question. One of the things that we have done as a district team, particularly as a curriculum team, is we purchased a course that is specifically designed for teachers of readers in grades 3 through 12. And it's an online Google course that teachers can sign up and take it at their own pace. But this was particularly something that my team and I also were very concerned about. While we were focusing on early literacy for many years in our district, we recognized that many of those students were not in 3rd grade anymore. So what were we going to do? And the feedback that we are getting from teachers that are a part of the Reading for Older Readers course, the feedback and the interaction in the course, there's so much aha moments that our teachers are like, I never heard of this before. I never understood this before. So we do have a customized course that we purchased from student achievement partners that we offer in the fall and the spring to teachers, and they do get paid for it. So I will make sure that my team continues to promote that course, but that is one of the things that we're working on. Another thing that we're working on, actually, Felicia will be leading this effort, who will be presenting later, but we're working with a group of teachers and leaders to really understand what this high quality instruction for reading looks like in high school. It's an area that many people have different perspectives. We have teachers in our district that love novel-based teaching, but we also recognize that there's a significant amount of our students that are also striving readers and require those foundational skills even in the upper grades. So she's going to be working with a community of practice group to really understand what that looks like at the high school, middle school to high school level. Or high school level, not middle school. Sorry, Felicia, high school.
Terrific. We also are having a lot of comments in the chat from people who've taken the course you just mentioned and think so highly of it. So
yes, I will make sure that we share that. Felicia or Amanda, just make sure we get that information, any flyers that we have, and put this in the follow-up communication. So just remind me if I forget, but we will make sure that we promote that widely. And again, the teachers that have participated in it, they've given us a lot of positive feedback. And the correct name of the course is Improving Reading for Older Students. Thank you, Felicia.
Oh, terrific, terrific. Another question that we have, what resources is the district working to provide teachers to promote science of reading? What's coming up next?
Oh, thank you so much again for that question. If you have not had an opportunity to read our strategic plan, Accelerating Philly, the district has made a significant investment in high quality instructional resources, and many of our teachers across the district were engaged in selecting these new high quality instructional resources that are definitely evidence-based and aligned to the science of reading, and they are comprehensive resources. So we are working internally to begin to think about how we're going to be implementing those resources next school year. But right now, our teams have customized our current curriculum with our current resources, and we've put things together to make sure all of the components of the science of reading is available in your current curriculum on our curriculum engine. So please utilize the curriculum engine. It was done intentionally to ensure that foundational skills were being addressed, as well as ensuring that that quality, grade level, culturally responsive reading piece was included in our units.
Excellent, excellent. Now we have a question from someone outside the district. What advice do you have for non-district teachers to get access to research-based and best practice materials?
So there, first of all, the Pennsylvania Department of Education offers a wide variety of free access to resources around structured literacy. There are many organizations. One organization, the AIM Academy, does a dynamic job, has a customized course that teachers can take at their own pace, leaders can take at their own pace, but there are free resources that are offered by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. They actually just recently opened up a leadership pathways for structured literacy that anyone across the state of Pennsylvania could have applied to be a part of that opportunity. So those are two that I know about. Nancy, you may have some ideas about some others that you might want to share as well.
Sure. Well, I'll just stamp that for Pennsylvania, a lot of the offerings are through PTAN, which is the Pennsylvania Teacher Technical Assistance Network. And they have a plethora of resources and courses for teachers. So that's one thing. The website, Science of Reading, What I Wish I'd Learned in College. I think I'm sort of mangling that name, but it's on Facebook, and they have terrific links to resources and recommendations. And the other thing I would mention is the Reading League. Reading League PA and Reading League National has tremendous free resources. So there's a couple.
Yeah, I see some questions coming in asking, can we get these things? We will make sure we share these things so that they're available as a part of the communication that goes out to you following this session.
Terrific. Yeah, we can synthesize this all and make sure it comes out to everybody. We're getting a lot more questions about the lack of curriculum for secondary students with low incidence disabilities.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
This is so again, where I talked about, we went through a process of working with teachers across the district to identify high quality instructional resources. One of those groups of teachers that we worked with were low incidence teachers to identify resources to support low incidence students. And one of the things that my team will be working on in collaboration with the Office of Diverse Learners is really working with those teachers in advance of implementing them to really understand the materials, to really think about what does those materials look like in relation to the needs, the individualized needs of the students that they service. So we understand that in special ed, it's not a one size fits all, or no instruction is a one size fits all, but we are working directly with special education teachers to really identify those resources that will be best for the students that they serve.
Fantastic, thank you. Unfortunately, that has to be the last question for this section. I think we could go on and on. And so I'm going to turn it back to Shanika. I know there's additional comments and questions in the chat, and we will try to follow up with those. But
yes, if you share those with me afterwards, I'm more than happy to provide a written response to any questions that we were not able to get to in the Q&A.
Fantastic.
All right,
Thank you, Dr. Nye.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone. Teachers, I love you. Educators, I love you. Keep on serving, but make sure you take care of yourself. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you. And of course, as we move throughout the Institute, there will be tons of resources shared and reviewed within our within our next 2 sessions. So as we move throughout, I highly encourage you to do a pedagogy post check, right? Think about your teaching and what areas or aspects that may need some reevaluation or change to enhance those reading outcomes. But I would love to introduce Felicia Brown, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, ELA, from the School District of Philadelphia. Felicia is a proud product of the School District of Philadelphia, graduating from Roxborough High School. She has worked with the district since 1998 as an elementary teacher, school-based teacher leader, literacy coach, and assistant principal. Felicia earned her bachelor's degree in elementary education from Millersville University, her master's degree in education administration and principal certification from Gwynedd Mercy, and second master's degree in education with a specialization in curriculum instruction and assessment from Walden University. Felicia has dedicated her entire career to the field of education and has committed purpose to teaching others. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Felicia.
All right, good morning and welcome everyone. I am so excited to be here. I've been a participant and now have the pleasure of speaking to you today about the vital role of vocabulary knowledge. Okay, so today we're going to dig deep into vocabulary instruction. And I'm so happy to see that Dr. Nye shared this with you earlier. So just going to talk a little bit more about Scarborough's reading route. It is a model of reading that helps us to understand the very complex process of reading. Again, it consists of 2 intertwined strands that are essential for proficient reading. And those 2 strands are the language comprehension strand and the word recognition strand. So as you can see, language comprehension includes background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. And these elements collectively support reading comprehension. We refer to this, sometimes you'll hear us say the upper strands of the reading rope. Now, at the bottom, we have word recognition, and that encompasses, as you can see, phonological awareness, decoding, sight word recognition, and fluency would be that bridge that ties to the bridge that crosses over into to a proficient reader. So we have this word recognition, language comprehension, and fluency is the bridge between that and a skilled reader. One thing that I wanted to share about this lower strand, word recognition, is that these skills are crucial in getting to those stronger language comprehension skills. Proficient word recognition supports language comprehension. So we want to ensure that our students have a solid foundation of the word recognition skills in order to be successful with the language comprehension skills. So for our session today, again, I said that we would be focusing specifically on vocabulary instruction. We've highlighted that. All right, so take a moment. Goodness gracious, my slides, thank you. I don't know why it keeps doing that. All right, here are our objectives for the session. Again, we're going to dig deep into vocabulary instruction. We're going to explore how vocabulary knowledge supports comprehension. We're going to take a look at an explicit vocabulary routine. And I'm also happy again that Dr. Nye talked about the importance of explicit instruction. And we're going to look at some resources today, or some strategies that I'm hoping that you will take back to your classroom and implement or use immediately. And those strategies and resources are going to help to support with vocabulary acquisition and retention. All right, we talked about the reading rope. And we're going to take a look at this quote. Cognitive scientists have known for decades the most important factor in reading comprehension is not generally applicable skills like finding the main idea, which we have tons of debates about this, but it's how much knowledge and vocabulary the reader has. So I want you to take a minute to think back on your own personal experience with vocabulary instruction. Think about when you were in school. How were you introduced to new vocabulary? And did you feel that when you were a student that you were given the tools that you needed to comprehend complex text? So if you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat, how were you introduced to vocabulary when you were a student? Workbooks. Thank you, Allison. At the beginning of a new story. Okay. Thank you, Grace. Workbook, spelling list. All right. Definitions, given a set of words before reading. And a test on Friday, precisely. Word banks, vocabulary lists. Okay. That some of those don't sound very meaningful. We're going to talk about that today. Now I want you to think about the experience of the students in your classroom. How are you currently introducing new vocabulary? Is it the way vocabulary was introduced for you, or is vocabulary instruction in your classroom currently providing, is it framed in a way that it's currently providing your students access to complex text? Okay, so slideshow with new vocabulary words. All right, we're going to talk about how we should be introducing vocabulary today. Okay, so I don't know why this keeps jumping. We're going to start an activity that's going to demonstrate the importance of vocabulary knowledge and how it impacts our reading comprehension. So we're going to read we're going to read the same passage 3 times. And with each reading of the passage, the number of unknown words is going to change. So as we engage in this activity, I really want you to think about how your vocabulary knowledge supports comprehension of this passage. So I'm going to ask for a brave soul to please volunteer to read this passage, and you can feel free to mute. This will be our first read, and it looks like it jumped. All right, would someone mind volunteering, coming off of mute and just reading this passage? And as we are listening to the reading of the passage, and as you read it, as well, I want you to think about how your vocabulary knowledge supports comprehension of this passage. Would anyone mind reading?
I can read it.
Okay, I can't see you, but I want to thank you very much for volunteering.
Like most people, as you enter your 40s, you'll start to become gugged, which simply means that you won't be able to nog any defa located within your immediate zip code. The solution is to wear Natat Satarski. The best angle for Rito through Satarski is when you lean way back and writ through the lig bottoms, thus affording the public a spectacular nonabeer blend of your Yanti Rigzane. Although a lot of people also get good results by Natato, their Satarski, up on their Jagabobear, thus allowing the Kratat Og to bypass the eyeballs, umwalt, and penetrate the Frimda directly.
You did a fabulous job. Thank you so much. So one of the things that I noticed is that you were able to decode all of the words in the text. Now we're in the classroom, and I'm going to start asking you some high level questions. Are you able to tell me what you read about? So for the volunteer that was just reading that, how did your knowledge of vocabulary impact your understanding of this passage? Because you read the words.
I mean, at first I'm like, I feel like I have an idea of what gugged might mean if you're entering your 40s, but then as soon as they start describing it as you won't be able to nog any, I was just like, okay, I have no idea what I'm talking about.
And why didn't you have an idea of what you were talking about?
Because I don't know what nog and daffodil means, really.
Okay, so you did not have knowledge of the meaning of those words. So I'm going to even go back to the title of the story. Are you in your blepper? I'm going to have trouble just from the title. I have no idea what a blepper is. And as our volunteer just shared, you were able to read the passage, but you had no knowledge of what those words meant. So what you just read, thank you. You knew 80% of those words, but you're not able to tell me much about this passage. So we're going to move to, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you guys to, I'm sorry. All right, I'm going to ask you guys to read this to yourself silently. This is with, 90% of the words. So read this to yourself. And as you're reading, I want you to tell me what you experience as you read the passage. And again, how did it impact your understanding of the passage? And you can drop that in the chat if you like. Okay, Grace says there are few more recognizable words. It's hard to use context if so many of the words are known. Absolutely. Megan, you're still confused. I was too when I read it. And again, that common theme, it is important to have the meaning of these words. So we have students that decode excellently, but when we go back to ask them questions about the text or the passage, they're unable to do so. Jael, you think it has something to do with wearing sunglasses? All over the place, 40s, then goes to the zip codes. Brenda said she thinks it's bifocals. Let's see. So again, this is with you knowing 90% of the words. Okay, now read it again. You have all the words. Okay, so we use this activity just to demonstrate the importance of vocabulary knowledge. It's excellent that you guys were able to decode, but you need more than just decoding to comprehend a passage. And that was also evidenced in our Scarborough's reading rope. The two strands are intertwined and go hand in hand. You need the word recognition along with the language comprehension skills to be a skilled and proficient reader. So I hope you enjoyed this activity. And we had one person with 90%, maybe more, Brenda, that was able to actually figure out what we were talking about. But what we don't want is for our students to feel the way that we just did reading this passage. We want to provide them, we want to build their vocabulary so that when they engage with these complex texts, that they're able to have discourse about it, they're able to write about it, and we want to hear them speaking and using the words as well. All right, so take a look at these 3 key literacy terms. We're going to be digging deeper into vocabulary in this session, and then my colleague Amanda is going to be digging deeper into morphology instruction today. So as you can see on all of the slides, all of the definitions share one keyword, and that keyword is knowledge. So we know that successful and proficient reading comprehension requires the acquisition of knowledge, and that's what we just demonstrate. And not just knowledge of vocabulary, but background knowledge as well. So what is key to remember is that knowledge is at the center of reading comprehension. We want kids to have acquisition of all kinds of knowledge, not just background knowledge, but vocabulary knowledge, and as we'll talk later today, morphology knowledge as well. Knowledge, again, is at the center of reading comprehension. All right, so this is our checkpoint. We're just summing up our opening activity and solidifying what we just learned. And we can say with confidence that a reader must know the meaning of words in a text in order to be able to comprehend. All right, so again, let's quickly review the definition that we have provided here for vocabulary. Vocabulary is the knowledge of word meanings and how to use them appropriately in speaking and writing. And quite frankly, that's our goal for students. That's our success criteria. Can the students understand the text that contains the word? And can students correctly use the word in discourse and writing? And again, our definition contains the word knowledge. Vocabulary offers an opportunity to build knowledge. So the questions that we need to be asking ourselves are, what words do we teach and how do we teach them? So research tells us that the most effective way to allow students to move their vocabulary from their working memory to their long-term memory, because that's where we want them. We want them stored in their long-term memory. And this takes 4 different forms in the classroom. So we have word-conscious classrooms, where we're creating environments that centers academic vocabulary. We have intentional on-purpose instruction, where we're choosing words intentionally. We're going to provide direct instruction through an explicit instructional routine. We have independent learning, word learning strategies, where we teach students how to use the dictionary, and you can refer to this as implicit instruction as well. We're still teaching them how to use dictionaries, context clues, morphemic analysis or morphology to determine the meaning of unknown words. And then finally, we have incidental on-purpose language experiences, where we create language-rich environments through read-alouds, and that's where our K-2 students are mostly getting these words that we're going to talk about through structure-independent reading and classroom and having discourse in the classroom. I'm going to take a minute. I would like for you guys to drop in the chat which of these methods align with practices found in your classroom. What are you doing in your classroom? One, 2, and 4, Alicia. Okay. All right, I'm seeing a lot of 2s. That's great. That's what we want to see. Intentional on-purpose instruction. All right, thank you for sharing. Okay, for some reason, my slide is not advancing. There we go. So for the purpose of our professional development today, we're going to dig deeper into intentional on-purpose instruction. And I see that a lot of you are saying that is already happening in your classroom. So that's wonderful. All right, so here's some guidelines for explicit vocabulary instruction. And I want to highlight the word explicit, meaning that we intentionally and directly teach specific words, their meanings, and how to use them in context. And these guidelines came from the book Explicit Instruction by Anita Archer and Charles Hughes. I believe I linked that in your interactive notes. Can we drop that in the chat? Someone from the Oakes Institute, Shanika, the interactive notes for, thank you so much. All right, so when we begin to think about which words do I teach, we want to first look at words that are unknown. So we're first going to select 3 to 5 words that are unknown. And I'm talking about at the K to 5, even up through high school, K to 12. We want to select 3 to 5 words that are unknown when we're talking about intentional on-purpose instruction. And we're doing a limited number like this because we're working with these. We're going to go in depth with these words and provide them with the explicit vocabulary instruction. So we don't want to do 15. Now, over the course of the week, your students may learn 10 to 15 words, but per lesson, we're going to identify between 3 to 5 unknown words. And then next, we're going to ask ourselves, is it necessary for my students to understand this word in order to be able to understand the text? So we want to select words that are important to understanding the passage or the text that the students are reading. Then we want to ask ourselves, how useful is the word? Will my students encounter the word frequently in different texts? How likely are they to use it in their everyday language? So we want to select words that students are going to hear, read, write, and say in the future. And then finally, we want to choose, words that are not easily understood or may require an explanation or interpretation in order for students to grasp words that pose a learning challenge to students. So we're going to select words that are difficult to learn and need interpretation. Okay, so vocabulary can be classified into 3 tiers when we're identifying them for direct instruction. So let's take a moment to establish, we want to norm a common understanding of the 3 tiers. So I'm going to give you a minute just to read, a few seconds, not a minute, to read the definitions of the vocabulary words, the vocabulary tiers displayed. Okay, so I'm going to start at the bottom of the slide, looking at tier 1 words. These are your everyday words like house, eat, clock, that students are going to use. And you'll also see a lot of tier 1 words in decodable text. And anyone that's not familiar with a decodable text texts are texts where students are introduced or not introduced, are able to reinforce a phonics sound spelling pattern that they learned. Those decodable texts offer students the opportunity to apply what they learned. So they contain a lot of tier 1 words. Then we're going to move up to tier 2 words. These are words used across content areas, and students have to comprehend them to effectively read, write, and speak about complex texts. And those are words like benevolent, elite, asset. Those are some examples of those words. And then we have tier 3 words, and these are the more academic words, and they're often specific to a particular discipline like science, math. An example of those would be atoms, protons, and electrons. For instance, understanding the term atom is important, but it may not be a word frequently used during your literacy lesson. So those would be considered tier 3 words. So when we're selecting words for intentional instruction, your primary focus should be on tier 2 words. These are words that are significantly, these are the words that significantly impact student learning. Now, this doesn't negate the need for domain-specific language and English language arts instruction, but it emphasizes that tier 2 words, they hold greater utility for students in both their education, so, while in school, as well as in their lives. So these are our high priority words, tier 2 words. All right, so I've been talking a lot, but I'm going to get you involved. So now that we've normed on the terms, we know what tier 1, 2, and 3 are. I believe we dropped the interactive notes in the chat, so you are still able to access the interactive notes. And since I've advanced the slide, you're still able to see the definitions of the tiers. What I would like for you to do now, in your interactive notes, you'll see a gradient of 3 green boxes, and you'll see the words tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I'd like for you to sort these words into 3 tiers, into the 3 tiers. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that. And if you're having trouble getting into the interactive notes, you can just jot it down on a piece of paper. All right, you have about another 30 seconds. Okay, so do we have a brave soul that would like to share with us which words did you identify as tier 1 words? Okay, chair, walk, pizza. Thank you, Camilla. Go ahead. Someone was trying to come off.
I was saying pizza, walk, friend, chair.
Okay, thank you so much. Pizza, walk, friend, and chair. Anybody want to share their tier 2 words? Tier 2 words?
I had vary, accumulate, falter, and misfortune.
Okay. And then how about, thank you so much. How about tier 3?
I have aorta, circumference, and legislature.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's take a look and see how you guys did. All right, so you did a fabulous job. Tier 1, we have walk, friend, pizza, and chair. Chair. Tier 2, accumulate, misfortune, vary, and falter. And tier 3, lava, legislator, aorta. Did I pronounce that right? And circumference. Aorta, sorry. All right, good. So we're practicing what you would do in your classroom. You're looking at the words, and again, our focus is tier 2 words. So now, sorted tier 2 words, we're actually going to practice identifying some tier 2 words within the text. Let's just say, for example, we're going to be using this text with our students. You're going to be reading this text to your students because it most likely will be a read aloud. And we want to identify those tier 2 words that are frequently used in written and oral language. So what I'd like for you to do is take a moment to read this. This is a short passage from Eric Carle's book, The Grouchy Ladybug. Which words would you identify? And we're going to probably have some interesting conversation about this, but which words would you identify to teach your student to comprehend the text? Remember, they're tier 2 words we're focusing on. And I'll read it while you guys are thinking. If you insist, answered the friendly ladybug sweetly. It looked the other ladybug straight in the eye. The grouchy ladybug stepped back. It looked less sure of itself. Oh, you're not big enough for me to fight, it said. Then why don't you pick on somebody bigger? I'll do that, screeched the grouchy ladybug. I'll show you. It puffed itself up and flew off. All right, what are some tier 2 words that you identified to teach? And I'm seeing in the chat that we have people picking some of the same words, and then we have people picking some different words. So they're not all the same. All right, so let's take a look at the words that were identified to be taught. So we have insist, sweetly, grouchy, enough, screeched, and puffed. I'm curious as to why. So we all didn't need to select the same words. That's going to depend on the students sitting in front of you. So we did come to a consensus on many of the words, but what we want to take into consideration again is the students that are sitting in front of us and their vocabulary knowledge. Some of these words like friendly, maybe that's a part of your school values and they have a deep understanding of what that word means. So it would not be necessary to go over that. Maybe that's a part of your something that your students, a pledge that they say every day. So you have broken down the meaning of that word and there would be no need to teach that explicitly. All right, you guys did a great job with that. Now we've sorted the words into tiers. We identified the tier 2 words that we want to teach. Now we're going to talk about how do I teach these words. We're going to look at an explicit vocabulary routine that you can complete with your students. And keep in mind that this is just one example of an explicit vocabulary routine. There are many, and I've also included some explicit vocabulary routines in your interactive notes. But again, what's key to remember is the word explicit. We don't want any ambiguity for students. We want to tell them exactly what the word is. And how we start with this explicit vocabulary routine is by pronouncing the words. We can't assume that students know how to pronounce the word correctly. So we want to pronounce the words, and then we want to have students say the words. Anita Archer calls it assumicide, when you assume that students know something. So again, we pronounce the words, never assuming that students can easily pronounce them. And then we want to provide students with a student-friendly definition. This is also key to remember. If students are unable, this is where students encounter problems with using a dictionary. In the past, even when I was in school, if I didn't know what a word meant, the teacher would say, well, look it up in the dictionary. Well, first, I may not know how to even spell the word. So clearly it's not in my vocabulary knowledge. I don't know how to spell it. And then when I get to the definition, I may not know the words that are used to explain the word. So I'm not going to have any knowledge of what that word means. And those are some of the things that we can encounter when telling students to use a dictionary. Now, I'm not saying that that is not a skill that we want to teach students, but those are some barriers that they may encounter in looking up a word. Back to the explicit vocabulary routine. We're going to introduce the word with a student-friendly definition. And then we're going to represent or model each word various ways. We might use a sentence, tell them in a sentence. We might use images. So when we're teaching these new vocabulary words, we should provide them multiple diverse representations of examples of the word to help them understand and remember the word's meaning. So again, sentences, images, examples, non-examples, synonyms. There are various ways that we could do that. Step 4, we're going to have the students practice using the word in different settings and applications. So it is essential to engage students in exercises and activities that encourage them to apply newly learned words in various real life or academic contexts. This really helps them to grasp the nuances of the word and how they are applied, how the word is applied in specific situations. And then 5, this is key, repeated exposure. We want to create repeated opportunities for our students to review and practice the words. So these, and the repeated exposure is for everything, not just vocabulary words, but we want students to practice. This helps them to retain and remember the vocabulary words over time. So ongoing and consistent reinforcement of those newly learned words over an extended period of time. Remember our success criteria. We want students to be able to read and understand the word in text. We want them to be able to use it in discourse, and we want them to be able to write using the word accurately and appropriately in their writing. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to model how to go over an example of an explicit vocabulary routine. So bear with me, you're going to be students for a second. You don't need to come off of mute or anything. But if I were introducing the word screech, which many of you identified as one of the words that you would instruct students and identified as a tier 2 word. So I would say to the students, good morning, boys and girls. We're learning a new word today. It's time for our vocabulary. And our first word is screech. This word, I would be pointing to the word because I would want students to see, to store that orthographically. This word is screech. Say the word screech. And then I would wait for my students to say the word screech. And I may do that 2 or 3 times. Screech means to cry out or shout in a loud and very, very high voice because you may be in extreme pain, or you may be extremely angry, or you may be extremely afraid. So you might cry out in a loud voice because of extreme pain, anger, or fear. Then we have a representation of the word. Now, I just gave them the definition of screech, and I didn't say anything about it being noise, but here is an example of an image of a tire screeching. So I would want to present this to them as well so they could understand the word in a different context. So here's my sentence. The car screeched to a halt just in time to avoid hitting the deer. Excuse me. So those were the first 3 steps of our routine. And we have 2 more. Now I'm going to get them to practice using the words in different settings and applications. So I might have them say, boys and girls, I want you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if I use the words correctly in a sentence. So I would say the parrot screeched loudly from its cage, mimicking the sound of the jungle. And I would ask them, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Okay, and then the next sentence, I would hope they would give me a thumbs up. The baby's laughter filled the room. And I see that would that be an example of screeched? No, and we didn't use the word screech in the example as well. So I would expect a thumbs down. Someone just mentioned about giving multiple definitions, and that is okay as well. Again, it depends on the students in front of you and how much they can take on at time in terms of the meaning, how you want that meaning to come across to them as well, how they're going to be using the word in the text and how they will be using the word in the future. I think that will also depend on the grade level as well. And then our example 2, we could have our students act it out. Show me what a cat that screeched in fear looks like when it saw a large dog approaching. Or a group of seagulls screeched as they circled overhead searching for food. Have students respond by acting out. And then our last step, we want to review and practice. This is where we're talking about that repeated exposure. You could give kids a word map where we have the word in the middle, and we ask them to come up with different words that mean synonyms that mean the same thing as screech. So we want to provide them repeated exposure and multiple opportunities to use the words that they've just learned, again, because we want to have these words stored in their long-term memory. At some point, again, kids are going to have to pull upon this vocabulary word in their long-term memory and apply it again to what they're reading. And they'll be able to do that if we've provided them with explicit instruction around that word. All right. So I want to also add that if you have English language learners in your classroom and are doing this routine, you should also include information about cognates in the student-friendly definition. So here's an example of that. We have the word proclaimed. We're going to have the kids say the word proclaimed. We're going to give them a student-friendly definition. Proclaim means to announce something with lots of excitement. A sentence example. After opening the envelope, my brother proudly proclaimed that he would be going to Temple University next year. And you can talk about the suffix added to the word proclaimed, changing the tense if you feel it's necessary at that time. And then we can also offer students synonyms and antonyms, as well as the cognate. And if you're not familiar with a cognate is, it refers to a word in one language that's similar in both form and meaning to a word in another language. Like proclaim in English is similar to proclamar in Spanish. All right, so that was just another example of how you could introduce this. Here we go. And these routines are good for all children, not just English language learners, students with IEPs. This is good for all students. This routine is research and evidence-based. All right, now finally, one of the concerns, or a valid and common concern regarding vocabulary instruction, is the potential time it can consume. And it often stems from the common practice of dedicating an excessive amount of time to slowly unraveling the meaning of a word. That's not what we're going to do. Or ask students, how many of you know what this word means? we already know they don't know what the word or know what the word means because we've identified it as a word that they need to be taught explicitly. So that can cut out a lot of time by giving them the definition of the word at the start and actively practicing how to use the word. So again, we don't want to have them figuring out what the word means. We want to have a quick and efficient solution to this time-consuming problem by using our explicit vocabulary routine, because it provides the student a friendly definition of the word at the beginning of the word being introduced. And then we follow that with active engagement with the word. So you want to be mindful if I'm speaking K to 5, or I would even say K to 2, you want to spend about maybe 5 minutes per word. So that's why we say 3 to 5 words. Once you get into 3rd through 5th, that time will decrease a little bit, but we wouldn't recommend going over 20 minutes for a vocabulary instruction when using an explicit vocabulary routine. Even when we get up to 6th through 12th grade, we say no more than 10 minutes for 10 to 15 minutes, not 15, 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes in 6th through 12th grade for vocabulary. And they also are being using explicit vocabulary routines as well. Because remember, our goal is not to have kids figure out what the meanings of the words are. Yes, in some instances where we're teaching we would do that, but the goal is to build their vocabulary knowledge. So that's why we want to stick to those times. All right, and I would like for you just to take a minute, and I'm going to ask you, I think I'm doing well with time, to reflect on your current vocabulary practices in your classroom. I'm going to just throw out some questions out there, and I want you to think about this. And I'm hoping that as a result of this professional development today, that you will change or add something to your toolkit. So I want you to start by evaluating again your existing vocabulary instructional practices. What strategies are you currently using? Are you implementing an explicit vocabulary routine? Think about the effectiveness of your current practices. Consider that. Are your students making progress in building their vocabulary? Think about how you select words for instruction. Think about the frequency of vocabulary lessons and how you integrate vocabulary teaching throughout your day, throughout your week. After you have introduced that word, how else are you exposing students to that word and providing them opportunities to engage and use that word, whether it be, again, through discourse or writing. And then finally, think about or identify any areas that you want to improve upon in your current vocabulary instructional practices. Right, so I'm going to give you 1 minute just to think about, just to reflect on what we talked about today. Think about some of those questions. Think about the effectiveness of your current practice. Do you notice your students' growth in vocabulary? Catherine says she has explicit vocabulary every day from the shared reading, and also you also have a morphology block teaching prefix and suffix roots and bases. That's awesome, Catherine. Okay, thank you for taking a minute to reflect. And we're going to end with this quote: "A large and rich vocabulary is the hallmark of an educated individual. Indeed, a large vocabulary repertoire facilitates becoming an educated person to the extent that vocabulary knowledge is strongly related to reading proficiency in particular and school achievement in general." So to sum it all up, what we learned and talked about today is that the extent of a student's reading comprehension proficiency is contingent upon their vocabulary knowledge. So this word knowledge allows them to comprehend the text. So as a teacher, you can help your students, you can help build their vocabulary knowledge by explicitly teaching meanings to improve their overall comprehension. And I want to thank you guys for your time and attention today. And I hope you receive some valuable and useful information. And I'm hoping that you feel comfortable with going back into your classroom and immediately, if you haven't been doing so, implementing an explicit vocabulary routine because you've learned the why or the reason behind why we're doing this. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Felicia. That was very insightful. And I also noticed a lot of you are thinking about your teaching strategies. Some of you are revamping your pedagogies at this very moment. So we will continue to do so. Now, if you are looking for more inspiration, you may want to rejuvenate yourself or your teaching practices, we are welcoming you or personally inviting you to register for Foundation's 27th annual Beyond School Hours National Education Conference. It will be held in New Orleans from February 14th to the 17th. You'll be able to explore the hottest topics in education right now. There will be a variety of workshops, presentations, resources, and tools that cover what's most important in education today, plus the opportunity for you to connect with over 2,000 educators across the country. Now, Dr. Nye was actually a keynote speaker last year. So what we'll do is, we have the link for the conference in the chat box if you'd like to learn more about it, but definitely take a look. I do want to encourage you all to continue to ask your questions. We will have a second Q&A session. We will take a 5-minute break, but before we do, I would love to remind you that we have a special drawing at the end of the Institute today. We will have 12 winners who will receive a book, Abdul's Story. So if we have, can't see it that well, but if you have students who are also struggling with writing, this book is very inspirational and supportive. You will receive accompanying lessons and activities and a $25 Amazon gift card. So please, sit tight, come back after our 5-minute break. And of course, we have one more session today. So you are going to load up on your toolkit on different strategies and different ways you can enhance your teaching, the different literacy strategies on all of the great things in your classroom. So what we'll do is we'll take a 5-minute break. Feel free to bring back something that brings you joy to show and share with the group. We will come back at 11:24. So we'll see you in 5 minutes. That was a quick 5 minutes, wasn't it? So hopefully you got a chance to get up, stretch, refill your mug. Some of you probably brought back something that brought you joy and you would love to share it with us. Go ahead and share it in the chat, or you can hold it up in your camera so that we all can see. But what we'll do is we are going to move forward with our session on morphology. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Amanda. So Amanda is an ELA curriculum specialist for the School District of Philadelphia. She is supporting K through 12 teachers and coaches. So when she is not busy in all things ELA, she loves vintage shopping and thinking about her next meal. In this session, she will present on how morphology is a key level or in reading comprehension. Participants will learn simple morphological practices that can be embedded in K through 5 ELA instruction that will help students access grade level complex text. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Shanika. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited to be here. I hope that you guys get something to take away from this session that you can use in your classrooms, and that will be helpful for you in your practice. As I try to make my slide click forward, there we go. So we're going to be talking about morphology in the K-5 classroom, but I do want to highlight that this is useful and usable beyond 5th grade for any teachers that might have some older students. And we're just going to be tying right into Felicia's presentation on vocabulary a few minutes ago. All right, I apologize. I have a little delay with my clicking. Thank you, Shanika. You might have to jump in because mine isn't clicking at all. I appreciate it. So what is morphology? So before we get into this, I just want to go through a little bit of the key terms. Morphology is the knowledge of meaningful word units in a language. And that word derives from the word morpheme, which consists of a root word or base word and affixes. Affixes are commonly known as prefixes and suffixes. Morphemes are the smallest units of a word that have meaning. So some words might just have one morpheme, for instance, play, show, build, and other words might have multiple morphemes, such as reconstructing or deconstruction. But again, a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a word. You can click forward. So, all right, there we go. List all the words that include the root word love. So love is both a root word and a base word because love can stand alone. But I want you to take a few minutes on your own to just think of all of the words you can make using the root word love. I'm going to give you like 2 minutes. So just think to yourself or jot them down how many different words you can come up with that have the word love in it. And I see some people are already dropping their ideas in the chat. Thank you. And also try and keep a track of the number you come up with. Yes, we've got so many: loves, loving, lovingly, lovely, loveliness, unloved, lovesick, loveless. Keep going, come up with some more. I'll give you 1 more minute to come up with a few more. Love struck, lover, lover boy, unlovable. Great. So when we're thinking of all of these, if we could go to the next slide. You guys came up with a great sample of words that have the root word love, which means to care for or desire, or it's a feeling of great fondness. Can anyone drop in the chat or come off mute and tell me how many words you were able to come up with altogether, if you were counting? 6, 20, 11. What else do we have? Anyone else want to drop something in? Well, thank you guys. It's important to understand that 14, great, 10. If you have a basic understanding of morphemes, be it the root or the prefixes or the suffixes, it really does help you understand a multitude of words, not just one word. So just knowing the word love doesn't just help you understand love. It can help you understand, as we saw here, maybe even up to 20 different words or more that may contain that root or base word. We can go to the next slide. So here's just a highlight of a few words with the root word love in it. You can see that the one thing you would want to point out to your students if you're teaching this particular word is you'll notice that the E drops off when you're adding it to endings, to certain endings, when you have certain suffixes attached. The E might drop off. So that's something that you would want to point out to some of your students. It doesn't, for instance, with the word loved, it isn't spelled with 2 E's. The E drops off. So it's just something to note when you are teaching your children root words. Sometimes the spelling does change of the root depending on what affixes you're attaching to it. You can go to the next slide. And here's just a couple of prefixes that are attached. Love is a word that maybe doesn't have the most prefixes that generally get attached to it, but there are a few here. So the prefix un and the prefix be are both highlighted here. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see a bunch of suffixes that can be added to the root love. So you've got suffixes that change the tense, that change how many, and then you can even see that sometimes you double up on suffixes. So for instance, the word loveliest, you're doubling up on the suffix. So first ly is added, meaning that it has the characteristics of love, and then the est is added, which means that it's the most of something. So if something is the loveliest, it has the most characteristics of love, which when you break that apart might help children understand the word a little bit better. Also, you can see that you can increase the complexity of your lesson depending on the students in your classroom. So you can just keep it basic for our kindergarten students, our first grade students, and just talk about adding ed, adding s, maybe adding ing, and then you can increase the complexity as the students get older and they're ready to start processing more complicated words. You can go to the next slide. And here's just an example of some common prefixes and suffixes broken down by grade band. And this document If it can be dropped in the chat now, fabulous. If not, it's provided to you in a handout that you'll get later. But there's all through K to 5, there's some common prefixes and suffixes that are taught and should be identified in different grade bands. So for instances, in kindergarten, you're just seeing plurals being added and past tenses being added and maybe action like ing. And you can see some examples in the final column. By second grade is when you're starting to add in those prefixes, un, re, dis, and you're including more suffixes like er and est, so that you're increasing the complexity as the students get older. You can go to the next slide. I do want to highlight that teaching morphology does benefit all of your students because it can help them understand such a multitude of words if they understand the parts of the word that they're looking at. It especially can benefit our English learners because, as Felicia mentioned earlier, a lot of your root words are cognates. And so if you can help a student access the language through their home language by highlighting where a root word might be similar to a word they know in their home language, that can really help them whenever they come across something similar in a new word in a text that they're reading. So this really is a high leverage practice, and something that can be easily added to your daily routine, either as whole group or small group, or even independent work. You can go to the next slide. Now you've seen this twice already, so I'm not going to belabor the point of Scarborough's rope, but I do want to note that morpheme instruction does benefit both the upper strands of language comprehension and the lower strands of word recognition. So not only can understanding morphemes help children decode faster, it can also benefit, obviously, their vocabulary, because if they come across an unfamiliar word, but it may contain a morpheme that they are familiar with, they may be able to extrapolate the meaning of that word more quickly and efficiently and independently than they would have if they did not have that morphological background knowledge. And it's interesting to note, I think at this point, that if you're talking about just 12 common Latin and Greek base elements, just 12 common base elements unlock over 100,000 words. So if you can just teach and get students acclimated to those morphemes, you can really help them understand thousands and thousands of words that they may not have been able to understand prior. And just as a side note, I was working with high school students this week and looking at what where their language deficits and vocabulary deficits might be. And it was clear that many of the students, because they had learned through balanced literacy and whole language, they were trying to read through words. They were not looking at words and identifying word parts. And so they were often missing the suffix of a word. They would be able to read the first parts of the word, perhaps the prefix and the root, and then they would just make up a suffix that they were adding on the end. And perhaps if they'd been taught more explicitly morphemes and the roles they play, they would be able to more quickly recognize those components in unfamiliar words, which would then help their reading and their reading comprehension. So this is something that does play a role throughout our students' entire educational careers, not just in the elementary grades. You can go to the next slide. All right. So we've talked a bit about why it's important, why I think it's something that you guys should be trying to incorporate into your classrooms if you're not already. And I did notice the interactive notes were just dropped where you can find everything I'm about to talk about moving forward, plus some of the information I've already shared. So we're going to be looking at some strategies that you can use to help support the teaching of morphology in your classroom. We're going to be looking at 3 strategies today. Obviously, these are not the be-all and end-all of strategies you can use in your classroom, but it's 3 that I think are fairly easy to navigate, fairly easy to institute, and something that can be done in a multitude of fashions, again, be it whole group, small group, or even as independent work, once you've taught the students how to do these things. So we're going to be looking at something called a morpheme matrix. We're going to be looking at the spotlight strategy, and then we're going to be looking at something called morpheme maps. So hopefully these will help you have some intentionality around your teaching of morphology in your classroom. All right, so first let's look at a morpheme matrix. What is it? How do you use it? And how can this help your students deliberately build their vocabulary knowledge and their morpheme knowledge? All right, I want you to just take a look at this, and you also have it in your handout. As you can see, there are different components. In the center is the part we're highlighting right now, which we're going to continue to use the root love. The word love is there. The definition of that morpheme is underneath. And then if you'll notice in the left column in yellow, we have a couple of prefixes, and in the green column, we have several suffixes. And the idea here is that in the row below, if you click forward for me, Shanika, you can see that you can pull down different components to create a new word. And this could be done as whole group. This could be done with the students doing it individually. You could make a copy of this and stick it inside a sheet protector, and the kids could use white dry erase markers to do this so that you don't have to constantly be making copies. If you're feeling particularly adept, you could turn these into magnets and have the kids shift them and move them to make it more tactile. So there's many, many ways you could present this to students. After you've taught it whole group, you can obviously, or in a small group, you can let kids play with this in centers, or however you feel it's most beneficial to your students to practice. And then underneath, since we're talking about some little kiddos too, you can have the students either write a sentence using the new word that they've created, using the different morphemes, or you can have them draw a picture if they're unable to write the sentence, and then perhaps they can dictate the sentence to you. What is it that you drew? And in this instance, the dog felt unloved when no one pet him. So this is something that perhaps the students could write this sentence if they're older. Perhaps the student might have just drawn a picture of a dog, and maybe the dog looks sad, and you would ask the student, tell me about your picture. And the student could say, oh, the dog feels unloved. And you can see that he's sad. And you could say, oh, well, why is he unloved? And maybe the child says no one wants to pet him. So this is something that can be done, again, in writing as a good writing practice. Or if the students aren't ready for that yet, they can do it orally and dictate it to you, and then you can transcribe what it is that they're saying. And again, this is in the note catcher. Another thing to note is that sometimes you don't want to teach roots. Maybe you want to work on just prefixes. And this can also work in that way too. So in this instance, you'll see that I've highlighted un, the prefix un, which means not. And then there are different roots and suffixes that can be added to, again, create a new word. And the students would do this the same way, but in this instance, you really want them to be just thinking about the prefix versus thinking about the roots or the suffixes. So if you click for me, maybe the student creates the word unfolds. And then again, they would write a sentence or draw a picture. The teacher unfolds the paper airplane. And ideally, when they're giving you these sentences or drawing these pictures, there is some indication that they're using the word properly, that they do understand what it means. So, you know, you'd want to just make sure that the sentences make sense and that they do align with what the word means. All right. Now moving on a bit, we're going to look at Spotlight. Spotlight is a really quick and easy hitter. It doesn't require a whole lot of pre-made work or things. So if you could click ahead for me. Again, we'll look at unloved. And so as a teacher, you could put this on the board, or you could have the students have it on a whiteboard in front of them. If you want to make it more engaging for the children, let them each also copy the word unloved down. And then if you click forward, you're just going to highlight the word parts. So the first part you might highlight is the prefix un. You'll tell them what it means. It means not. Something that I think might be fun to do with kids as you're doing this is to allow them to either maybe have like a clear piece of cellophane that's colored and they can hold it over the different parts of the words. So maybe they have a yellow piece of cellophane and they hold it over un. So they're covering it as you're talking about it. Another way that you could do it is, I know my kids loved when I would let them use flashlights. And so I found, a ton of little tiny mini flashlights that cost very little. And they could hold the flashlight over the different parts of the word as you're talking about it. It just gives them another little tool to get them excited. Honestly, I use flashlights for everything. I would also let them flashlight read, which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about right now. But if you say we're going to flashlight read and let them do some independent reading with their flashlights, somehow everybody just is the most excited to read ever. So you could highlight here again, you see the prefix un is highlighted. And then if we click forward, we're highlighting the root love. And again, this would be a moment where you would want to point out that the E drops off of the root when you're adding a suffix, this particular suffix to the word. And this is also a good point where you would want to point out if there's a cognate in another language for this root. For love, there is not a specific cognate attached to it, but if there was, this would be a moment where you would want to point that out. Or you could even ask your students, does anyone know a word that sounds similar in your language? Give them a moment to tap into their resources, their background knowledge, and give them a moment to point that out to the students. And then the last part, you'd highlight the suffix, ed, which, is an action or process that puts it in the past tense. And so you just want to, this is just like a fun way to break apart the words and to see if the students can break apart the words. And you could model it first and then put another word on the board and see if the students can spotlight it independently. And that way, so if, let's say you're working on un as your prefix, are the students able to find the prefix in the words every time? Is it something that has clicked for them? Are they able to immediately visualize it and see it in the word and point out where it is? So it can also be a quick check of understanding. Are they understanding what it is that you've been teaching them? And then our last one is morpheme maps. And here, I'm going to give you a couple of ways to do this. I do want to point out, though, that morpheme maps, there's a lot of different ways that these are talked about. And so I am just going to talk about the way I see it being used in an effective way, but there are many different ways that you can use morpheme maps. And there's definitely a lot of different versions of this. So I'm just going to be highlighting one version that I think might be helpful and engaging in your classrooms, but please understand, this is not like the be all and end all when we're talking about what a morpheme map is. So if you click to the next slide, here's a blank, and you have a blank in your interactive notes that you can copy and use. But you'll see that there's a circle in the center or an oval and a bunch of squares around the outside. So in the center, you're going to place whatever morpheme you're focusing on. So be that a root word, a prefix or a suffix. So in this case, I'm thinking that we're focusing on the prefix un. And then there's two ways you can do this. In this example right here, the squares are all blank. If you go back one second, Shanika, please. In the first instance, they're blank. So you just have the prefix in the center. And here you could have the students write as many words as they can that utilize that prefix in the rectangles around. And it could be made, if the student's already adept at this, you could turn it into a race. You could time it, have them compete, see who can come up with the most words that correctly use the prefix un. You could do all different sorts of things to make this more fun and engaging if your students are already comfortable with how this works. But it's just something that you can definitely differentiate depending on your student skill sets and your student needs. Now, if you click ahead, alternatively, you can pre-fill all of the rectangles with a variety of words, some that do use the prefix un and some that do not. And you can make this as hard or as easy as you feel suits your students. Or if you're working in small group, you could adjust it for each of your small groups differently, depending on what they needed. So if you'll look closely, I made some of these extra tricky. First of all, I picked all words that started with you. So that was the first thing that might make this hard for some students. And you might not want to do that if that's too difficult for your children. You'll also notice that I picked some words that start with UN, but it's not the prefix un. So for instance, universe. Universe starts with UN, but is universe utilizing the prefix un in this case. And you can drop your thought in the chat. Is universe using the prefix un? What prefix, thank you. What prefix is it using? What is the prefix being used there? Yes, uni. And in this case, you might want to highlight that for students because I would think that many children would incorrectly identify that as being a word that begins with the prefix un. And so that would be a teachable moment if they do that. No, in this case, it's actually a different prefix, and you could explain what the different prefix means if you wanted to. You can go as deep as you want with that, but it is a moment for students to learn to be a little bit more careful with their reading, and that sometimes how we see something isn't necessarily how something really is. And then a further extension of this, you could do a writing activity around this. So after the students have come up with their words or have identified words that begin with that prefix, maybe they could write a story using as many of those words correctly as they can, you know, and see how many words they can get into their paragraph. This is especially good for older students. Or if you're working with littler ones, maybe you could do a shared writing and have the students tell you what to write. And, you know, you as the teacher write it up on the smartboard and let them see their work, underline, circle the words that are using the morpheme that you're focusing on, really giving them some extra time to practice many things, writing being included, because as we know, writing is a hard thing sometimes to get to fit into our lessons. And so I just want to give people a minute to share any thoughts or any of these three examples of possible ways to teach morphemes. Are any of them striking home with you? Do any of them feel like something that you could lift up in your classrooms, that you could maybe even take back next week and start working with if you're able to? Yes, I have upstairs on the chart. Yes. And so all of the words begin with you. So I was trying to make things tricky to see if they could figure it out. So does anyone feel like any of these might work with your children? Yes, the one with the blank boxes for the little people. Yes, I tried to make these simple so that you can make it as hard or as easy as possible, depending on what grade band you're teaching, because obviously the difference between kindergarten and 5th grade is vast. So I wanted to try and make things as useful as possible. I'm glad that some people will be finding these helpful, and I do hope that this is helpful in supporting ESOL students as well. This isn't something that should just be quarantined for your Tier 1 instruction. Great, I'm so happy. And I'm sorry, I finished faster than I thought I would. So I'm done a few minutes early, but I just want to take a second and look at this quote. There's an equity argument to be made for knowledge building curricula. It levels the playing field for kids. Everybody is exposed to the same content. Otherwise, you leave it up to chance. And so, hopefully, as we know in our district, we have a very diverse bunch of learners, and hopefully some of these can really help you make the text a bit more accessible for all of your children, and help them really build on their vocabulary knowledge. Thank you guys so much for putting up with me for this time. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And it's all good because now we have some extra time to spend in our Q&A session. So again, we have some questions that we are going to answer during this block. Don't forget that you can continue to ask your questions in the chat box. What I'll do now is hand it over to Nancy so that we can get started with answering these questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Shanika and Felicia and Amanda. Thank you. I think everybody is going to benefit tremendously from the explicit strategies that you shared on vocabulary development and morphology. And you made the point so clearly that this all relates to knowledge, and knowledge is what's key to comprehension. If you don't know the words and you can't understand the morphological elements of the words, you're not going to understand the content. And it just comes to my mind that we're talking about the science of reading, but so many times I think people expect that we're going to talk about explicit systematic instruction in phonics. But it applies to vocabulary, morphology, and all these other areas related to comprehension. So thank you for that. Some of the questions that we have, I'm going to go back to vocabulary. To begin, one of the questions was, after the 15 to 20 minutes of explicit vocabulary instruction, how do we continue to build the knowledge? What about during small group instruction? What practice should occur? And I think this, I'll just add my commentary that I think Isabel Beck says that we need probably 10 exposures to a word before it goes into long-term memory. So Felicia, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I was going to say there are many things you educators can do to employ a variety of engaging and interacting after the initial explicit vocabulary routine. Many activities that encourage students to actively use and explore that vocabulary. So some examples could be, we have focus walls in the district that we're working on, where you have the vocabulary, where students can see and interact with the new vocabulary. You would have the word, you would have the definition, you would have some images, you would have the word used in a sentence. And we would encourage our students to refer to vocabulary wall when they're writing or discussing a topic. So that's one way. You could use the words as a word of the day or word of the week. One of the words that you introduce, have students explore the word's meaning, how we use it in the context. Again, sentences, discussions, have them to write about it. We could have a vocabulary journal where we provide students the opportunity to record their new words, or a word bank in your classroom. Every time we learn a new, we could put little coins or something in there, tokens. And you want to have kids to regularly review and discuss their journal entries, not just, write the new word and forget about it, but we want to go back to it and talk about what you learned about that word. Even in terms of games, we can play vocabulary bingo, create cards with the vocabulary in each square. And then you can call out a definition or a synonym or an antonym, of the word, allow them to apply that word different contexts. Trying to think of games, storytelling, encourage the kids to use the words in storytelling, write or share stories about the newly learned vocabulary. So that, again, also allows them to apply the words in context. Word associations are great as well. Have them brainstorm words associated with the particular vocabulary word that really expands their understanding and helps them to see the words and the word connections. Role playing, I love to do that, and kids enjoy doing that well. Art and illustrations, encourage them to create their own visual representations or drawings that depict the meaning of a word. I think that's quite a few.
That's quite a few.
I hope that helped.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, Felicia. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the next question is very specifically on morphology, and to you, Amanda. The question is, can you explain the difference between root and base words? And can you also explain how the "un" in uncle is not a prefix? So there's two questions there.
Sure. So a root and a base are, they're the same thing, except that generally speaking, when you're talking about root words, it's not a word that can stand on its own, whereas a base word is often considered a word that can stand on its own. So love is a word that can stand on its own, but there are many base words that are just not real words by themselves. And so I guess verse is a real word, but I could think of one right now, but it would take me a second, that isn't a real word. Many, especially that we use in the K-5 space, are both a root and a base because they are freestanding words. And then as far as why sometimes you can have something that appears to be a prefix at the beginning of a word, but isn't, is if you were to separate it off from the rest of the word, is the rest of the word a root or a base? And in the instance of uncle, if you take the UN off, all you're left with is CLE. CLE is not a root or a base. It does not have a meaning unto itself. And so when we're thinking about morphemes, we always have to, thank you, struct. Yes, that is a good non-meaning root. Thank you. So when you're thinking about morphemes, they have to have meaning. Each morpheme has to have a meaning in and of itself. And if it doesn't, then you can't separate those pieces apart. So uncle, CLE, means nothing, which means it by itself is not a morpheme, which means that uncle is just a word as it is all by itself. It does derive from probably the French, probably the Latin before that, but it is just its own word, and some words are just their own words. And the word itself, again, is a base essentially, because you could add an S to uncles, and change how many uncles you have. But I hope that helps answer that question.
I just wanted to add that when we think about root words, we think about the origin of the word. So, and kind of visualize like a tree. Underneath the tree, you have the roots, and that's where the word derives from. So it's like the origin of the word. Then on top of that, we have the base word. Above the ground, we have the base word. I always just think of that image to remind myself it's the origin of the word when we're speaking about the roots.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had a couple of questions around English as a second language, and we may have answered some of these, but for both vocabulary and morphology, do you have any more strategies than what you shared today on how we can support ESL students in vocabulary and morphology? And I want to note that Dr. Nye has already said that the district has a guide for English language development that will be shared as part of the resources after this, in the resources that are shared subsequent to this Literacy Institute. But
Nancy,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I actually dropped the guide in the chat, our English language development guide.
Oh, great.
But we can still add it to that
Okay.
that list of resources.
Oh,
And
terrific.
hopefully they're able to access that as well.
Terrific. So any more comments on how your strategies, Felicia or Amanda, can be specifically used or adapted to support ESL students?
I would say this is not my area of expertise, but with working with newcomers, I believe that was the question, English language learners.
Yep.
It's essential to have a balanced approach because we have those tier 2 and tier 3 words where we focus for deep vocabulary development. And I don't want to say tier 1 words should not be neglected, especially for students who are just beginning to learn English. So with the tier 1, there's nothing wrong with using an explicit vocabulary routine. It's not going to hurt anybody with tier 1 words, but I would just keep in mind that you would have to have a balanced approach with the tiered words. But their main focus again should be introducing students to the tier 1 words because again, they're newcomers. So you want to focus on practical everyday vocabulary, high frequency words, basic words that are essential for communication, like nouns, verbs, adjectives. Those tier 1 words are the building block of language, and they help students function in English speaking environments. So it's definitely, I also included in my interactive notes routines for English language learners as well.
Excellent. Excellent.
And I just wanted to add on to that pictures are extremely helpful. And so, with the morpheme matrix in particular, you could begin with a picture and have that next to the matrix. And so, to help the students attach the meaning to a thing that's recognizable in some way. So I know that the way it's written is that the sentence or the picture might come after, but there's certainly an argument to be made that could come first to help build that connection for your ESL students, because you really, especially when you're dealing with more tier 1 type vocabulary words, if they really don't have any background knowledge of English, is that they need that visual in order to make that connection. And then obviously lots of practice verbally using the words. Speaking is many of us probably know from talk to text, that you need to talk it first before you can read it or write it. So you just want to be giving your L's many opportunities to verbally use these new vocabulary words and verbally practice with these morphemes, so that they are then eventually ready to read and write them. But you have to start with talking.
Terrific.
In that environment, providing a supportive and inclusive classroom environment where the students feel comfortable using those tier 1 words, comfortable making mistakes without fear or judgment, giving them real life applications, opportunities for them to use the words in real life context. Just like Amanda said, repetition, we talked about that with my vocabulary presentation, how important repetition and practice is, the visual aids and that supportive environment.
I love the emphasis on a supportive environment that goes back to what Dr. Nye was talking about, the joyful, safe place that hopefully the children and the teachers operate from. So
I also think it's, I'm sorry, go ahead. It's also, I think, important to understand that in the development of language acquisition for ELLs, there's often a period of silence, and that's acceptable, right? Because many of our children are just listening and absorbing, and it doesn't mean that they're not learning and they're not engaging. It's just a part of the language development process, is that there's silence. And that eventually, once the students feel like they've acquired enough information, they will start speaking. But that really isn't a process that should be rushed when we're talking about safe environments. You know, you need to give the students the space to come to the language as they're ready, because it is very scary. And I can imagine, I always try to picture myself dropped in Japan and I just know nothing. And I can't read anything and I can't understand anything, and I'm just lost. And that would be true now at my current age versus at just as much as it would have been true when I was 5. So I think it's worth noting that at all age bands, we need to give our students grace in what they are and aren't capable of sharing out loud with us right away.
Thank you. There are a number of questions that are around resources that are available and professional development. So I'll just go through those, and then I think we have time for people to certainly add more questions to the text, because to the chat, because I think we have time. The questions are, how can teachers get access to the resources that have been shared today by everyone? And they are going to go out in the follow-up material from the Institute. Here's another question. How can professional development be improved to be more applicable to those who attend? What role can frontline teachers and support staff play in making this happen? Any comments from you, Felicia and Amanda?
Yeah, so I would say how professional development is determined. If you are a teacher, because I know we have other teachers from other schools, maybe districts, school districts here, we definitely look at data, how our students are doing, as well as our teacher knowledge. For example, right now, we know that the science of reading and structured literacy, there's going to be a law, which Dr. and I discussed earlier, where teachers have to receive a certain number of hours in training around structured literacy. So we also stay abreast of what's happening in the field of education in terms of best practices. But one of the things we do, data is a huge piece of how we determine what the need is, as well as what's happening in the field, as well as our instructional rounds and walkthroughs that we go through schools and see what teachers are doing, where they may need support. One of the things that is really awesome in our district is that we try to ensure that everyone is on the same page. So we have learning cycles where I don't call them learning cycles, where we develop we have an idea of what the professional development is. We front load that information to our coaches, to the school-based teacher leaders, so that when teachers receive that PD, that they're already prepared to coach into that content area with whatever they learn. So that is something. Amanda, I'm not sure if I'm forgetting anything. We also we record all of our professional development, and it was housed on the Office of Teaching and Learning. They've changed their name, so I'm not sure where the resources are right now, but we record every professional development session. So say I saw in one of the comments that someone said this should be available for ESOL teachers. So if they were at another professional development session and they didn't have the opportunity to attend one of the content sessions that 5th grade English language arts teacher received, they would be able to go back and watch the recording. But again, we always try to ensure that there's support in the schools by front loading and meeting with the school-based teachers first, ensuring that their knowledge base is up to date and that they have the coaching strategies that they need to support teachers with this information. But again, the information, we usually keep those recordings on the Educators Hub for the underneath the Office of Teaching and Learning. So if they were just to go and search Educators Hub, they would find videos from previous year, recordings of professional developments from previous years. And I'm not sure how much is up this year just yet, but they usually are up there for teachers to look at. Excuse me.
Another question that's specifically related to vocabulary. Do you think that video reading is helpful in teaching vocabulary?
What do we mean by video? I'm assuming they mean like leaving a recording of a text being read. Was that what we're referring to? I think, yeah, you have a human resource standing in front of you who has all the knowledge and skills that are necessary to teach students about vocabulary. I would leave that up to the teacher. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question because I'm not sure if that's what they're talking about. I'm assuming, I don't want to do a suicide. I'm assuming that they are referring to a video of a story being read to students. And I would strongly recommend not doing that. You have the teacher in the classroom who is supposed to be modeling what good reading sounds like, teaching kids how to attend to punctuations, how they should be expressing the porosity of the word. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly, if that's what they were asking about. So if we can get clarity.
Caprice is the person who asked the question, and she said yes. And I guess that means yes, that it is a video reading of a text.
Right. For explicit instruction, I would refer to the teacher to deliver that instruction. It is not an issue for kids to listen to stories. Maybe they do that at home while mom and dad are cooking dinner. Kids are listening to stories, so it's nothing wrong with that. But while we're in school and we have a teacher there that has the knowledge that the video does not have, I think it is a best practice for the teacher to be the one reading the text to students. And remember, in classrooms, we want students reading as well. We want our students, of course, the teacher is going to model what good reading sounds like, but we also want to give students the opportunity to practice, reading, writing, and talking about the text that they're reading as well. Amanda, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I'm pretty sure you covered it all. Yeah, I think it's like you said, I think it's a solid. You could definitely utilize that at home, and Caprice has clarified that that's what they were referencing. I think that anytime kids are engaged with a text, either auditorially or reading independently, it's a bonus. And so if you can get kids to listen to audiobooks at home that happen to include the vocabulary words that you've been teaching, then that's phenomenal. And then you can just, again, when they're in class, that's your moment to highlight other important things that maybe the student missed if they were reading it pre-reading it independently, for instance. And I know that that's definitely something that's extremely helpful for older students who are L's, is giving them those opportunities to hear it multiple times. And so sometimes the pre-reading auditorially is beneficial because it gives them some advanced idea of what's going to be said.
Thank you. You're going to have one last question. And it's what can teachers do when they don't have the on-level materials they need for their students? For example, when students test at grade 1 level, but you only have 4th grade materials. And one of the questions in the chat said, what some of us are facing is a lack of physical materials, like no decodable books in a 4th grade classroom where the students are benchmarking at 1st grade level. So can you make some suggestions about, without those materials, decodables, let's say, the teachers can address the needs of these in this example, 4th graders up, at 1st grade reading level?
Yeah, in regard to vocabulary instruction, or instruction in general. Let me go back to vocabulary instruction. Someone had mentioned earlier about small group instruction. This would be the only time that I would teach for students that are not on grade level. I'm going to introduce the words to all my students, but I might pull a small group to front load that information, those vocabulary words, to give them additional opportunities to engage with the word prior to reading the text. So that might be one of the things that I do. One of the things we want to keep in mind is that although our students may not be reading proficiently at the grade level, they come with funds of knowledge. So they have a lot of, they may not be on grade level, but they are coming to you with some knowledge. And what we want to do is to scaffold up to giving students access to the grade level work that we are doing. Now, that does require a lot of planning on the teacher's end, thinking about how I'm going to get this student that is, not functioning at grade level to engage with the grade level text. But again, one of the ways you can do that is by small group instruction, meeting the students with those new words that you're going to engage with. Even when looking at a text, what part of the text is complex? What part of this text are students going to struggle with? What can I do before I allow my students to engage with this text to support their understanding of this passage or this text? I would not recommend going back to, clearly they're going to need some support, some intervention if we're in fourth grade on the first grade. Reading level, the school, again, I don't know if I'm speaking to all Philadelphia school district teachers or some charter schools. The student is going to need some intensive intervention, but in terms of working with their grade level text, we have to scaffold, build that vocabulary knowledge, build that background knowledge, build that morphology knowledge, what we were just talking about, so that students are able to engage with the work at that level.
Alicia, thank you. Amanda, do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, just briefly, there, when we're talking about decodables, there aren't decodables at the fourth grade reading level and per our current materials. So that generally speaking, the idea is that they've gotten those skills already. So as Felicia said, if they haven't had those, if they're lacking certain decoding skills that would be necessary to read at grade level, you would have to plan for interventions for that child. And that would something, again, as Felicia said, that would be a small group or even individualized plan that you would be working on with that child to figure out how to get them where they need to be. But I just want to continue to add that our students need to be working in grade level text because intellectually, that's where they need to be. And just because a child cannot necessarily fluently read at grade level does not mean they can't engage intellectually with texts at grade level. And as they get older, it can be increasingly disconcerting for a child to be given things that are consistently below where they are intellectually, because that's where a teacher believes them to be at reading level wise. And so there's ways to chunk text to have them just read short portions that make at least sections of the text available to the children to start trying to practice their fluency. But again, like Felicia said, that requires advanced planning on the teacher's part.
Amanda and Felicia, thank you so much. I think it's time for us to turn it back, but lots of great information and ideas and strategies today. Thank you.
Yes,
You're
thank
welcome.
you. Thank you to all of our guests. And of course, thank you to Christy Chang, Sharon Marino, David Weinstein for all of your help in planning for our Helen Oakes Literacy Institute. We greatly appreciate your support. What I'll do now is quickly hand it back over to Rhonda Lauer, Foundation's President and CEO. She'll have a few last words to share.
I want to thank all of you. This was just terrific, and I want to thank the members of Dr. Nye's team Felicia and Amanda. Nancy, you're always terrific. Thank you so much. You're so appreciated. And last but not least, the two gentlemen who really make this happen and their families, and that's Dennis Oakes and Jeffrey Oakes. I know how proud Helen would be. And I want to also thank at the end my team. You're a great team. Shanika, you're a dreamboat. And the whole team, Mary Ellen, Liz, all of the people in this that work in the center. Thank you so very much. Hillary, Dave, Andrew, and Yana. Appreciate it. I hope that this was really useful to all of you, the most important people who are here, the teachers. Remember that we have we don't really think of the Helen Oakes Institute as one event. We have many different free webinars on a regular basis. We want your participation. We particularly send out targeted emails and notices to you. So please stay tuned for the next seminar and also for our series of webinars so that we can follow up. Thank you all. And Shanika, I think you have a raffle to give. You have something to give away.
Of course, we definitely want to thank all of our participants for coming and participating this Saturday. I hope you, was able to gain something new to refresh your pedagogies and your teaching strategies. Now, let's get to that special drawing, right? Now, as a quick reminder, our webinar is recorded and it will be shared on our YouTube channel. All the resources will be shared with you via email. So be on the lookout for that document. And of course, at the end of this webinar, you will be prompted to fill out a form to receive Act 48 credits. And of course, we're always looking for your feedback to make this a great learning experience for us all. And of course, certificates will also be mailed out within a week. But let's talk about this special drawing here, right? So we have 12 lucky winners who will receive a book from Philadelphia's very own Jamila Tompkins Bigelow with accompanying lessons and activities. And of course, last but not least, a $25 Amazon gift card. So if you can, drum roll, please. We are going to reveal our 12 winners. All right, here are our winners. Marissa K, Allison W, Caitlin W, Imani R, Grace R, Kai S, Sarah C, Kiana S, Fat. I'm so sorry if I'm ruining your name. You can unmute and just let me know. But Phaser U, Tashira R, William P, Brenda O. There is a link in the chat box. If you are a winner on this screen, you are going to fill out your full name, fill out the form with your full name and email. Make sure you're using the email that you used to register for this webinar, and make sure you are entering your home address so that you can receive your prize. Okay, so that will be sent out to you as soon as possible. Congratulations to our winner. So exciting. Now, in addition to our winners, please don't forget to fill out that form, another form that was shared in the chat, to provide your feedback on today's session. And of course, complete the form so that you can receive those Act 48 credits. Okay, so again, congratulations to our winners. And please do not forget to fill out the feedback form that's located in the chat. All right. Otherwise, I hope everyone enjoy the rest of your weekend. We are definitely looking forward to reconnecting. We plan on having a spring networking event, so be on the lookout for those details as well. Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. We're going to sit tight so that you can go ahead and gain access to the form for your feedback and Act 48 credits. And also, if you are a winner, don't forget to fill out that form so that you can receive your prize. Enjoy your weekend, everyone.
Shanika, thank you. You enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. We'll stay on for 1 more minute so that you can grab your forms in the chat box. Take care. Grace, I believe you are a winner. There's a form for you in the chat box for you to fill out. Congratulations.
Is there a separate form for the Act 48 credits?
Yes. I'm going to share it in the chat right now. The Act 48 credit is the feedback form.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No, all good. No problem. All right. Enjoy your weekend, everyone.